Good morning and peace to you. I truly hope and pray that all is well with you and your family. On this Sunday morning, we gather with gratitude in our hearts, not because everything is perfect, but because we are here, drawing breath, and are able to be aware of that one breath that was breathed by God into us all, a breath that affirms that we have life and allows us to fight for the things of life. We are also grateful that we are, as we were reminded last week, one body, one church, and one people. I want to thank those who are making that statement a reality through your actions. I especially thank Gail Provine, who has beautifully arranged and organized and orchestrated a network of phone calls being made to our church community. People are staying in touch, letters are being written, and I want to express my gratitude to, of course, Hazel and Susan last week for their beautiful words and their beautiful presence in our community. And a shout out to the circuit riders as well, who are out there sending care bags to those who are in need. All of this is good, and it contributes to the well-being of our church in these uncertain times. As I mentioned last Sunday, and as I shared in my message to the community, I believe on Monday, today we'll be reflecting on the 4th of July, the life of Frederick Douglass, and the power of narrative to shape and inspire us to be who God has called us to be in this moment. But first, let us begin our service by hearing the hymn popularly known as "We're Marching on to Zion." I began with Isaac Watts' timeless hymn with that Robert Lowry refrain. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, that beautiful city of God. This song is instructive for reasons I will share later. But for now, I want to talk about baseball. Indeed, there is a certain experience of Americana that is affirmed by the sport that spans back to the 1800s. It's a sport played during the dog days of summer and colors the memories of 4th of July picnics filled with hot dogs and peanuts and your beverage of choice. Last week, I truly missed the games that conjures up the smells of leather, the crack of the bat, the calculations and the mind games being played between the pitcher and the batter, and the silent strategy and suspense within every pitch count. One of my lasting memories is going down the tunnel of Old Yankee Stadium hours before the game, sometime in the mid-'80s, and seeing the sea of royal blue seats set against the impossibly vivid green of the field and the raked and ready dirt of the diamond. I miss baseball with its history and all of its magic. That memory is forged in the stadium, originally built in 1923, nicknamed the house that Ruth built. As a Yankee fan, I know the stories of George Herman Ruth, nicknamed the Babe. I know the stats of the 1920s era Yanks when he and Lou Gehrig mowed through the major leagues and accumulating a slew of World Series trophies. I know that the Babe, especially, is a giant and a legend. But have you ever heard of Josh Gibson? He is arguably every bit as amazing as Babe Ruth. Born in Georgia in 1911, Gibson is best known for his career with the Negro League's Homestead Grays, where he earned the moniker the Black Babe Ruth. Now, of course, the two never played against or with each other, because play between races was illegal and forbidden. Baseball, with all of its magic, was also horribly segregated and racist. Still, Josh Gibson excelled, and the plaque that now hangs in the Baseball Hall of Fame states that he hit, quote, almost 800 home runs in league and independent baseball during his 17-year career. In the Black imagination, Josh Gibson was a living embodiment of Casey at bat, with stories told about how he smashed a home run at Yankee Stadium that landed reportedly 580 feet from home plate. He was bigger than life. Unfortunately, Josh Gibson died early, at the age of 35, due to the complications of a stroke. That was January of 1947. Of course, Jackie Robinson became the first Black player in the major leagues in April of 1947. And Larry Doby, who broke the American League color barrier in July of 1947, reflected on the sequence of that year's monumental events, saying, and I quote, "One of the things that was disappointing and disheartening to a lot of the Black players at that time was that Jack was not the best player. The best was Josh Gibson. I think that's one of the reasons why Josh died so early. He was heartbroken." Now, does the story of Josh Gibson negate the story of Babe Ruth? Does a context of racism and malice eradicate the memories of this great game's magic? Maybe for some and maybe not. It does, however, complicate it. The question is, are we able to hold the truth of two narratives in our hands and be moved to see a deeper truth in that complexity even when it is uncomfortable? This question is what the great abolitionist and statesman Frederick Douglass brought to the nation's awareness 168 years ago this week in his iconic speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July?" As we consider it again today, let us begin by hearing the scriptures from the book of Psalms.
Today's scripture reading comes from the New Revised Standard Version Bible, Psalms 137, verses 1 through 4, a lament over the destruction of Jerusalem. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows, there we hung our harps. For there our captors ask us for songs, and our tormentors ask for mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land?
I started with this biblical passage because Frederick Douglass uses it as this centering theme in his famous speech. He exclaims, "This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? If so, there is a parallel to your conduct. I can today take up the plaintive lament of a peeled and woe-smitten people. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land?" Douglass continues, "Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them." This passage in Psalm is actually a hymn that expressed the lamentations of a Jewish people in exile. Previously, the kingdom of Israel, after being united under Kings David and Solomon, was split into two. The northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians in 722 BC, and the southern kingdom of Judah was eventually conquered by the Babylonian Empire. More, many of the people were then forced into exile, creating the setting of the psalm to which the rivers of Babylon refer. The captives, exiles, they're longing for home. They found it cruel to be forced to sing the Lord's song of Zion by the rivers of a strange land in which they were not free. Douglass uses his imagery to great effect during the Independence Day speech in Rochester, New York, in the context of celebrating a country that, to millions enslaved, was a mockery of freedom. The verses are rhetorically positioned as a keystone image that challenges the central image and story of America, the home of the free and the land of the brave. Douglass introduces a competing story, a different perspective, one that complicates the magic and the mythos of the existing national narrative. It is brilliant and it is scary. But before we go on, let me tell you a little bit about Frederick Douglass. We know him as this master orator and reformer, but his story begins in slavery in February 1818 in Dorchester County on the eastern shore of Maryland. Doing the research for this hit pretty close to home because, as you can see on the map, Harriet Tubman was from Talbot County, just north of Dorchester. And my family, going all the way back to the same era as Douglass and Tubman, come from Calvert and Anne Arundel County, right across the bay. At any rate, Douglass eventually escaped, and his harrowing tale is recounted in his several autobiographies, including his famous Narratives of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave in 1845. He married his wife, Anna Murray from Baltimore, who not only made his escape possible by providing money and fake papers and a sailor's uniform, but she was his faithful partner for 44 years. The couple eventually settled in Massachusetts, and Douglass thought of joining the white Methodist Church, but was disappointed when he found that it was segregated. Yes, even in the North. They did, however, join an African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, which was a black denomination that counted Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman among its members. In fact, Douglass became a licensed preacher in 1839, a vocational journey that began way back in his youth. And his work within the church helped him hone his oratorical gifts and skills that allowed him to rise to national prominence and to be in demand by leaders who held the highest of office. And that brings us back to 1852, July 5th, 168 years ago. Douglass entered Corinthian Hall in Rochester, New York, agreeing to speak on the day after the 4th. He directly addressed a large audience composed of Washington politicians, white abolitionists, and even President Millard Fillmore. Through his lyrical mastery, he forwarded in stark terms the glaring contradictions of a nation that hypocritically projects the values of liberty and equality while justifying the literal enslavement of fellow humans. This deeply religious and prophetic Douglass even made theological arguments that recognize, quote, the widest possible difference between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ. In that famous speech, Douglass made a clear rebuke. You profess to believe, quote, that of one blood God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate and glory in your hatred all men whose skin are not colored like your own. Indeed, in the same way, the story of Josh Gibson and the reality of the racial segregation, in the same way that challenges the sentimentality of our baseball memories, Douglass uses his speech about the 4th of July to challenge our glorified mythologies about the virtues of our country's past. The question, like before, is this: are we able to hold the truth of two narratives in our hands and then be moved to see a deeper truth in that complexity, even when it is uncomfortable? So, what does this mean for us today? Well, let us go back to our opening song. We are marching on to Zion, beautiful city of Zion. And some Americans have had the privilege of this country, with all of its freedoms and benefits, being a type of Zion, a shining city on the hill. But today we are also hearing the stories of those who are saying through protest, through art, through politics, how can we sing about this here Zion when it feels like our history of exile and oppression and the experience of discrimination and harm makes America feel more like the banks of the river of Babylon, a strange land that swallows any melodies of merriment. In fact, as I prepared this sermon, I listened to the song By the Rivers of Babylon, originally a Rastafarian song back in the 1970s, which had adopted and adapted the Psalms 137 text, a text, again, that formed the heart of Douglass's speech. And as I listened to that song, it became clearer. There is a story, a narrative, and a history that allows some Americans in this country to sing, in truth, we're marching on to Zion. Beautiful, beautiful Zion. While other Americans, who are mostly black and brown, look at their own stories, their own narratives, and their own histories in this country, and they cry out, by the rivers of Babylon. There we sat down, and there we wept when we remembered Zion. For there they that carried us away captive required of us a song. But how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? So here we are, in a strange time, with a global pandemic and a burgeoning political season as a backdrop, hearing and seeing the clash and the clang of competing stories as it pertains to race. There is a palpable angst and anxiety, and a present fear and fragility, along with the bark and the bite of those who seek to demagogue and divide and those who seek to instigate and incite. And these stories, these lived realities, do not always live together nicely. It is not easy or comfortable to peek underneath the red, white, and blue bunting draped on America's Tom Sawyer-like picket fences to see the legacy of white supremacy lurking in the tall grass. But here we are, and every once in a while something happens. Something like the shocking killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and delicately held narratives get disrupted. And people begin to feel unmoored, confused, and even scared, especially when confronting the scourge of racism that is not some pastime relic like Ebbets Field, but a load-bearing wall in our present societal structures, a house which implicates us all, whether we like that or not. But though we are here today with obvious challenges ahead, I still remain heartened. For as Douglass said in the conclusion of his 4th of July speech, "I do not despair of this country. Therefore, I leave where I began, with hope." And today I still have hope, because we carry a story of Zion. This time I am not referring to the ancient hill where King David built Jerusalem, or even a hymn. But I'm thinking about that eschatological image that represents a place where God dwells. It is a place where God's justice and goodness reigns in the hearts of all and is realized in the very structures of society and in the lived affairs of all humans. It is the beloved community made real, where no one goes hungry and no one goes without a home and no one dies callously in the streets. I have hope because the story of Zion that we carry allows us in Roseville and beyond to do the hard but good work, to face the truth of the competing stories that live in us and in our country. It also allows the magic of our myths to fizzle out if they need be, and empowers us to engage the noble work, whether it's found on the protest line or in a book study or just a difficult conversation that you know you need to have with a family member. Zion is that place of courageous authenticity, and as Frederick Douglass said, the life of a nation is secure only while the nation is honest, truthful, and virtuous. So on this day, permeated by the presence of a pandemic and petty politics, I still have hope. I have hope despite the efforts of those who cling to the Confederate flag as heritage, that yet to be made symbol of the some values that Douglass rebuked 168 years ago. A flag that terrorized my parents' generations down south, and a flag that presided over Klan meetings in the North. But there is a time when hateful ideas and their symbols must come down. I have hope, despite those who desire to douse the multiracial passion to resolve these issues, despite those trying to get us mired in the default camps of our political ideologies, despite those conspiring to tear down the prophetic legacies of those who seek to call this nation up to its lofty ideals. I know that there is a time when love wins. I have hope, because as we hold on to the story of Zion, the proclamation of the kingdom of God for all people, then we can answer the question that I posed earlier and truly hold on to the fact that we can hold these multiple narratives in our hands and be moved to see a deeper truth and more complex truth. For in doing so, we take our place in this generation to do our part in perfecting our union, this country that we love, a country that affirms that all are created equal and entitled to certain inalienable rights, a nation that truly honors liberty and pursues justice for all. I know we can, because we do this not alone, but we do this together as a family and as a church, as a community and as a nation. And when the waters of the rivers of Babylon finally dry up, and when we can all march to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion, together in truth, oh, I say what a day of rejoicing that will be. We will see a vision of God's might manifested as truths that we hold to be self-evident. A truth as mighty as Frederick Douglass's bellowing proclamation in Rochester's Corinthian Hall, and a truth as mighty as a home run being cracked from Josh Gibson's wooden bat. And so I conclude today with a prayerful observation from Douglass, who assured us that the arm of the Lord is not shortened, and by the celestial empire, the mystery of ages is being solved. The fiat of the Almighty, let there be light, has not yet spent its force, and no abuse, no outrage, whether in taste, sport, or avarice, can now hide itself from the all-pervading light. My prayer today is that all of you may know that all-pervading light of the divine. May you be guided and strengthened in God's infinite grace to make the promise of Zion real in your life and within this world. Now may you go with God, and may you go in God's peace.